All right, so we are all ready to get started. The very first thing we're gonna do is get our paint palettes ready. So if you have a plate or whatever you're gonna be using for your colors, that would be great to grab that. Last class, I forgot to even grab a plate or anything for my colors. So it was a little, had to make sure I got that. All right. So you can use whatever colors you want for class. It really is completely 100% up to you. I have a couple colors pulled out here. I've got like a yellowy ivory, a blue, a red. I would highly recommend though doing a red and a green, and I'll show you why as we go. And then I have an orange and a pink. So honestly, whatever colors you want, just put them on a plate or whatever you're using as a paint palette to So this is the ivory color. I love using this ivory color because it is yellowy, but it's not a super bright yellow, and it gives me a nice, it can give you like a nice neutral color too. So I'll just get this set up. I do try to keep like my similar colors together on my paint palette. So like I'll put my pink and my red next to each other. I'll do like my blue and greens around the same area. So I kind of go in like, I guess, rainbow order, you could say. And I saw someone just said in the chat, can I share the exact colors I'm using? My favorite green, and pretty much the only green I use, is the AmeriColor Forest Green. I love that green. It's kind of like more of a blue green. I am going to use the AmeriColor Navy Blue as well. I do not have too many colors, honestly. I tend to just mix the colors that I want. Oh, that was a lot. I'll show you some tricks with mixing colors too as we go. The ivory color I was talking about it's literally just ivory from AmeriColor. I used all the time. Oh, the pink I have is a princess pink from Chef Master. This is like such an old bottle. Sorry, it looks gross, but Chef Master. So I go back and forth. I don't necessarily like have a preference one color or the other. I know some people feel very passionately about their colors, and then this is just, I think, just plain orange from AmeriColor. I will say the reason I do tend to like AmeriColor more than Chef Master is kind of a silly reason, but it's mostly because of the lids. Like I cannot stand the lids that are like this because they make a mess, and you always have the color on top, and then I like hit my arm on it, and I just find that they make a mess. Did I put, oh, and the red I'm using, again, this is an old bottle, is tulip red. Which tulip red is more of like an orangey red rather than like a fire truck red. So that's how I'll set up my paint palette. Nothing super crazy there. Oh, one other thing that I did want to mention is if you have your workbook, I would recommend either having it at least pulled up. I will share my screen so you'll be able to see that. But either have it pulled up, or if you have it printed, that's great too. If you don't have it and don't feel like looking for it, like I said, I'll share my screen, and so that will be totally fine. Sorry, I'm just swapping over here. Before we jump into painting, this is like I forget which page exactly in your workbook, but before we begin, and this is for all of my perfectionists out there, and that is like, hi, me, I am also a perfectionist. I just want to remind you all that we are painting cookies. We are not painting beautiful oil paintings that are going to be preserved forever and hang on someone's wall. These are cookies and they are going to get eaten. So while yes, they will be beautiful and people will love them and people are going to say, oh my gosh, they're too pretty to eat. They're still cookies at the end of the day. And we are not just painting one of them typically for an order, we're painting a bunch of them. So this is not the time to spend 3 hours on one painted cookie to make it absolutely perfect. It's okay if it looks, you know, a little different from some of the other ones that you do. They're not all going to be the same in uniform. They're not all going to be perfect, and that's okay. What we're looking to do is create beautiful flowers quickly so that you can actually do it in a practical amount of time for a real order. And yeah, so again, try to not be a perfectionist. I say that for myself as well, because I struggle with that and will sit there and spend forever on one design because I'm like, oh, it needs something else, or it's just not perfect. But if we can kind of take a step back and realize that flowers are fun because like in nature, they're not perfect and they are all different. So it's okay that, you know, yours are going to look different than mine and yours are going to look different than everyone else taking the class. And that's, I think, what makes it fun. So that's my first little spiel for you, is don't get all wrapped up in trying to make them too perfect. Plus, like, if they're too perfect, then that's a little boring, right? Okay. Now let's jump in to painting. If you have one of your large, I think on the list I said, I forget exactly how many, but large, just like basically blank canvases of cookies is what we're looking for. So it doesn't matter which cookie you choose, just one of the bigger ones, and we're gonna play around with some brush strokes and how to use our different paintbrushes to create different types of leaves and petals and all that good stuff. All right. Just change my angle here. Okay, the first thing that we're gonna do, and we are on the workbook page that has a big thing that says brush strokes on the side. So if you're taking notes, this is where we're at, or if you wanna rewatch the replay later on, that is kind of where we are. So the first type of brush stroke that I have written down on there are round leaves. And what I mean by round leaves are like your eucalyptus leaves, things like that. And it says round brush. Now, you may have round brushes or you might not. If your brushes are really super new, they probably are all very nicely tapered and still look, you know, like they did in the package. And that's awesome. But really what we're looking for is a brush that doesn't necessarily come to a super point on the end. I am going to show you how to use a flat brush. So let me grab a bigger one. We'll use a flat brush to make some of these round leaves, and then we'll also use some of our taper brushes. So you can really do it kind of a bunch of different ways with different style brushes, and I'll show you all those. What you don't want to use is a nice skinny, pointy, thin brush. That's not going to really be too useful for you if you want to do these round leaves. So first thing we're going to do is find some green, because we're going to be making some leaves. And I'm going to start with making, actually, you know what? No, I'm just going to start with, if you have the brushes that I put on the list of supplies, I'm going to start with a number 4 brush. So this is the smaller flat end brush that I'm starting with, and I'm just gonna start creating a little bit of my paint. So all I'm doing to create my paint is adding a little bit of water, and that's the blue, not the green. I'm adding water to my palette, and then I'm gonna take just the tiniest bit of pigment, a little bit of that food coloring, and make a nice green color. Now that's kind of a dark green. I think I want to go a little lighter. So to make it lighter, all I'm going to do is just add some more water. So you can see this is that forest green from AmeriColor. and I like it. I think it's pretty. If you don't want it such a bright green, or if you want to tone down your green at all you have to do is add the color that is opposite on the color wheel, which would be red. And I think this is my red. So I'm gonna add just like the teeniest, tiniest dot of red. You can barely even see it on my brush. And if I mix that in with my green, you can see that it gives me more of a toned down green color. So the more red you add, the more toned down it will be. If you add too much red though, it will turn brown. So you don't want to add too much red. But now you can see we have like a nice sort of like an olivey color. So now I have a color that I like. I'm not going to just use the flat side and try to make a leaf like this. I mean, I can, right? Like that works. But what I really want to do is create a leaf. Let me get some of that off there. That looks round on the end. So I'm gonna flip my paintbrush to the side so that it looks like this. And I'm going to play around with different amounts of pressure. So I'm gonna start with a lot of pressure, and then I'm gonna release that pressure and pull up. And you can see that I get that nice little teardrop shape with a round end, and it comes to a point. So again, all I'm doing there is adding a little paint on my paintbrush. I do like to dab the excess water off on my cloth here so that it's not too, doesn't have too much that will make my icing crater. And again, I'm just, instead of going with the flat side of my paintbrush, I'm gonna turn it 90 degrees so that I'm just using the edge to go flat and then release that pressure and pull up. Now we can do the same exact thing, but we can do it with a wider brush, and it will just give us a bigger leaf or petal or whatever you're making. So this is the number 8 that I'm gonna do the exact same thing with. And I think I'm gonna make my color a little more green. So I'm gonna just add some extra green in here. And then same idea. So flip it to the side here. Push down with a lot of pressure and then release that pressure and pull up. And you can play around also with the angle that you hold your hand. So for that one that I just did, my paintbrush was pretty flat, but if I angle my paintbrush up a bit more, I can get a shorter leaf like that. So a lot of this is just playing around, seeing what's working for you, what style leaf you like. But that is how I would create a round leaf. Is just you start with a lot of pressure and then you release that pressure and have a lighter touch. Now we could do the same thing with one of these brushes. This is actually, what number is this? Let me see. This is the number 1, and this is a tapered brush. Now I've used my brushes a lot, so you can see that it's not looking too tapered, just because it looks more fluffy and whatnot, because I have used it and dried it and all that kind of stuff. But I can still do the same thing. So I'm gonna wet my brush, put a little color on it. And again, this is the number 1. I can do the same kind of thing. Now I'm not focusing too much on making this brush look tapered. It still kind of has that rounded edge at this point, and I can do the same thing. I'm gonna start with a lot of pressure and pull up. And I didn't dab my paintbrush. That's why you want to dab your paintbrush, because there was a puddle on my cookie. So again, I'm starting with a lot of pressure and then pulling up, and that's going to give me those round looking leaves. So 2 different brushes, both with similar style leaves that we have there with those round edge. Now, if we're looking to do some pointy leaves, what we want is a tapered brush. Now, this is the same brush that I just used for that round leaf, which is that number 1. But I want to make sure that I have a tapered brush. So you can already see I kind of did it by accident. I'm actually going to show you. If you have your brushes straight out of the packaging, they're probably still tapered like I explained, but you can see that this has that fluffy end like we just talked about. So if I want to do a pointy leaf, I really need a tapered pointed brush. So what I'm going to do is just dip my brush in the water here. And then I'm going to use my paper towel, or if you have like one of these reusable cloths like I have, I'm just going to take my wet brush and put it down and give it a little swirl. And you can see now that I gave it a little swirl, it is nice and pointy, ready for a good pointed leaf. Okay, now same thing, we're gonna just add some pigment, add some color onto our brush, give it a little tap so that you don't have too much. I also like to just simply roll it, just like I did on that paper towel. You can roll it in the color to make sure that you have all of those bristles together to give you a nice point. And we're gonna play around with pressure. So if we want pointed leaves rather than these round ones, instead I'm gonna start with really light pressure. And then as I drag it, I'm gonna add more pressure. And then I'm gonna release and pull up and do less pressure again. And now I've got a nice looking pointed leaf. And different size brushes are gonna give you different size leaves. So again, I'm starting with a little bit of pressure, increasing my pressure, and then pulling up. You can make them kind of curved if you wanted to. So starting with a little pressure. And so you can play around with it, play around. But again, it all comes down to how much pressure are you putting on those bristles and on that paintbrush. That brush that I just used was actually the number 3. Sorry, I changed it. I know I originally said 1. So this is going to be the number 1. I'll show you the difference here. So again, these are the number 3. Let's do a number 1. Okay, you can see I just dipped my brush and you'll notice that I have that little V in there. I don't really want that. That's not ideal for painting pointy things. So I'm going to go back and give it a nice little roll. This brush is making a liar out of me. Sometimes you just gotta, there we go. Sometimes you just have to play around with it a little bit, but there you go. You can see that it's pointed again. Tap the excess off, and then I'm going to start with a little bit of pressure and more pressure. A little bit of pressure and more pressure. Little more, and then release up. So that's how you get leaves that are pointed on both ends. You can also, instead of using the brush just straight like this, you can change that up and kind of use the side of your brush. So for example, I could make like a nice crescent moon and start with a little bit of pressure and then increase my pressure and go kind of around or go down the opposite way. So that's what it looks like using the side. And if you use the side of your brush, you're spreading those bristles more and getting a wider brush stroke. So if you look, this again is my number 1. That is the same brush as if I go sideways. And this is what it looks like if I just keep it straight. So you can see how much wider of a brush stroke I'm able to get by using the side of my brush instead of just the like top of it. You can do the same thing with your skinny little tiny detail brushes. So these guys, if you have those or something similar, I tend to use this one the most. It's like the second shortest. I'm not sure about the bead colors, if they're the same in my version of this set as yours, since I got mine so long ago, but it's the black beads for me. So if I add a little water to this, and then just so you know, right now I'm down in the bottom where it says thin brushing your workbook, if you're following along in the workbook. So these are great for all kinds of things. These I love just adding little details with. You can kind of tap them to make little detail flowers, and we'll go into that more. But you can do all of the same things that we did with those bigger tapered brushes with the little ones here. So again, I can start with a little bit of pressure and then add more pressure. I tend to, with these little guys, because it's so thin, I tend to use the side of my brush a little bit more. So I'll kind of start with a little pressure and then you work the side of my brush, and that makes a really nice, delicate leaf. So instead of just going straight, a lot of pressure and back up, that's a really skinny leaf. If I want something a bit bigger, I will kind of work my hand up, if you notice. So I start with a little bit of pressure and then add more of that pressure, but I'm using the whole side of my brush there. And it just kind of takes practice to get a feel for the brush in your hand and which brushes you like to use and which brushes you feel the most comfortable using for different types of things. But that's a little summary on different brushes and different brush strokes. Does anybody have questions or anything that you want me to go back over, or are we good to move on here? And just check the chat. All right, it looks like we are good. So that was brush strokes. If you flip the page of your workbook, we are now going to dive into greenery. So this is the page that we're looking at here. I will, if you have small circle cookies, my plan here is to do there's 5 different greenery designs in the workbook. So my plan is to do each one on a separate cookie. So if you've got those 5 smaller circles, that's what we're using these for. All right, I am actually going to share my screen here and pull up the, here we go. So this is the page that we are on in the workbook. And what I want you all to notice when we're painting greenery is we're looking for what makes the greenery look unique. You'll notice that none of these are really uniform. I like to paint from real pictures rather than, looking at, sometimes I'll paint from clip art or whatever else I can find, but I really like looking at natural plants and seeing how I can mimic that in my painting. So if we look at this first branch here that we'll paint, you'll notice that the leaves are not the same shape and they're not the same size, and they're also not the same color. This big guy and this big guy and this one over here are all a darker green. And then we've got some of these that are a bit smaller, a lighter green. Now, I'm not going to focus too much on trying to match the colors or perfectly do the shading by any means. I actually rarely even think about that. But I do like to look at the shape and look how they kind of flow and lay and how they meet the stem. So you'll notice that these 2 leaves come to a point and they meet at the same place on the stem. Same thing with these 2 and these 2 and these 2. So these are sort of things that you want to look at when you're kind of deciding how you want to start painting. So that being said, that's gonna be the first one we paint. Now I shouldn't say always. I typically start by just painting a skinny line as a branch on my page. So I'm gonna grab some green and I'm gonna grab one of my thin little brushes, one of those detail brushes. And let's see.
Emily, you muted yourself at some point.
I'm muted. That's good. Okay. So sorry about that. I don't know how long I was muted for, but all I said was I used one of my skinny little brushes to give me a nice line down the center there. Then how long was I muted? Did you hear what I was saying about the leaves? Or was I muted for all of that when I was sharing my screen?
You were muted for all of it.
Oh no. Okay, let me go back. I don't know how I did that. Just when I was
We
painting.
heard you explain the different leaves, those two, the different colors, darker, attached at the same point. We did hear that.
Oh, okay. All right, then we're good. All right. I don't know why it muted me. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so then just when I was painting this part. So then, all right, and now I'm all out of the place here. Okay, so skinny line, skinny brush. I think we're good there. Now to start making the leaves, we're gonna jump in with, I'm gonna use, this is the number 1. I'm gonna use a tapered number 1 brush. And I'm gonna start making some leaves. Now, if you have your workbook pulled up next to you or on your computer, you can kind of paint that. I do have it pulled up. Actually, you know what? Let me just put it here so that you can look at that while I paint. So this is the first one that we're doing right over here. So I'm gonna start, I usually like to start with whatever the focal point is. So this guy stands out to me the most. And you can see it's a little more rounded, but still comes to a point. So I'm going to just give myself a good amount of pressure to start and then release that pressure to give it that shape. And then I've got this little guy over here. So I'll add a small little, same thing. And you'll notice that when I'm painting these, I'm never outlining and then coloring things in. I'm really using those brush strokes that we went over to create the leaves. I could, of course, do a nice little outline of my leaf like this and then color it in. But it just doesn't give as even of a flow, I feel like, and it takes longer. So it's a lot easier and a lot quicker if you just learn how to use your paintbrushes to do nice brush strokes that give you a leaf all at once. Then you've got this little one right here, which is practically a line. So I'm just gonna give it like a little something like that. And again, you can change up the colors. So I'm gonna add a little water to it, make it a little lighter, and add something else over here, maybe a little darker. And then we've got one that comes here. So again, I'm just using that same brush stroke that we worked on where you're adding pressure and then releasing that pressure. And then we've got a bigger, longer one on the side here. And then we've got this little guy here, which I think just will finish it off. So you've got just a simple little, and if like I feel like this has a bare spot here. So I'm gonna just add another one. I'm gonna make this one a little longer. And you've got that nice variation in color, you've got variation in size and in shape, and that's kind of what makes it look more realistic. I could do the same thing, but I could make it uniform straight through. So I'll do another one here. But if I did it uniform, it would look like this more so. which still looks pretty, of course, but I think that this one's just a little bit more interesting to look at. So again, it's all preference and what you like. It's all preference in the design. If we were trying to replicate this one, then, you know, make them a little different and vary them. So that's that first one. If we look at the next one here, so if we look at this next one, you'll see that there are these, it's kind of like a long branch with a leaf on the end, a long branch with a leaf on the end. And these are very obviously pointed on the bottom and pointed on the top with a wide leaf in the middle. But you'll notice that like this one is really wide. This one in here looks a bit skinnier. So we're always looking for the different variation in leaves, and that's what's going to give us that unique look. All right, so then let's get started and paint that one. So now we're going with this guy, and I think I'm actually gonna do this one, the whole thing, I'm gonna do with a number 3. If you wanna use a different brush, by all means, use a different brush. But I think I'm gonna do the whole thing with a number 3. I think I can get a delicate enough point to it that I can still get these skinny lines in here. Now this one is nice, and because it will really lend itself well to doing different variations of color in it as well. So I'm gonna start with my light color, I think, and then I'll go back in and add some darker shades. Again, I always start with what stands out to me the most, and that would be this guy in here, maybe this one over here. So again, start with the color you like, because that'll be your focal point, and then we can add in some extra stuff. So for this one, I'm gonna start by doing a like really light amount of pressure, and then I'm gonna add more pressure, and then release that pressure to give me that leaf that looks like this guy right here. Then I think I'll do the same thing, but I'm gonna start working in this leaf over here. So we'll do just a little pressure, add more pressure. And then I'm just gonna keep doing the same thing and kind of mimicking and following the leaves that I see in this picture. Now I'm gonna start with a lot of pressure on this one and then come up. And that was to do this leaf right here, because you can see I can't see the skinny part of that leaf. I just see the tall one. And now maybe I'll change up my color. I'll add a little bit of a darker shade in there. And you can kind of just play around with it, let them overlap. It doesn't need to look exactly like the picture. You're just kind of filling in, and we've got a short one down here that I can add. And it's kind of fun to have them overlap and look a little different. You can play around with different shades of green, different colors. And just kind of keep adding to it until you like what you see.
Emily, what size brush are you using again? Or what number
Can you,
brush?
can you say that one more time?
Oh, sure. What number brush are you using for this again?
I'm using number 3.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So again, it's not like it looks exactly like the picture, but we're just looking to kind of mimic the feeling that the picture has. Am I going too fast, or are you guys with me still? So here's 2 different greeneries that we got here. Maybe I'll put them there. Look like they're pictures. All right, the next one, I guess I should have started with this next one because I feel like this one is honestly the most simple. It is just the leaves are most consistent, I would say, when compared to these two. So yeah, we can jump in and paint that one as well. I'm also going to start with this one and use one of my skinny little brushes. I think maybe I'm going to add a little bit of yellow or the ivory to my green to just make it, I don't know, different color. Play around with it, make it fun. So I'm going to start with just that long branch to begin. A little skinny line. And then for this one, I think I'm actually going to just stick with my smaller brush. And I'm choosing to stick with a smaller brush because these are thinner lines. These are thinner leaves, I should say. So I can get that leaf shape because it's pointed on both ends. I can still do that with this type of brush, and they're smaller. So it'll kind of give me a little bit more control of getting that smaller leaf look. So again, same idea. Now, because this is my really skinny brush, this is where I'm going to kind of brush up and use the edge and the side of my paintbrush. So I'm going to start with a little bit of pressure and then push down and on a diagonal a little bit and use the side of my paintbrush. And then there's another one that's kind of next to it. And then same thing, you're just playing around with how much pressure you're applying to the brush. And these go all in a row right down this branch for this particular one. And you can see if you look at these 2 or 3 are pointed up, and then these 3 here kind of point out a little bit more. So that's what I'm going to try to copy as I paint. And then you'll notice this side is a little skinnier than these ones. So I'll again try to mimic that. But there's really no wrong way to do it. It's not like anybody who's eating your cookies is also looking at the picture that you used as a reference for your florals or for your greenery. So to them, it's still going to look beautiful. So don't get hung up. Don't get caught up in the fact that like this doesn't look exactly like that. If you're just looking for inspiration, you're not looking for an exact replica. All right, so those are our 3 pointed greenery examples that we have here. Now on the bottom, we've got 2 round examples. So we have this one looks like eucalyptus to me. This one, I don't really know what it is. I am not a plant expert. I do not pretend to be, but we can go ahead and paint them. So these are more of our rounded leaves. So you'll see that these ones over in here overlap. Same with these, but we've got these ones that look really skinny from the angle that we're looking at the leaf. This one, these are all so drastically different. This is more of like a round, almost like a heart shape leaf, whereas this is a line. This one is a standard teardrop looking leaf, where this one is some type of like curved rectangle almost. So we want to be looking at those shapes as we are painting, and that's what we're gonna put on our cookies. Same thing here, right? Like this one is a nice, beautiful teardrop. This one is kind of a squished, crooked teardrop. So we're looking at the differences in the petals. I keep saying petals, in the leaves, and that's what we are going to go for as we paint and what we're going to try to replicate. All right, so let's go through and paint this guy next. So again, we're going to start with our skinny brush and just give some branches. Now you'll notice these This one here has more than one single branch. It's got a branch here with some branches that pop off of it, and we're gonna do we're gonna do that and use that same kind of look for when we're painting. And again, they don't have to be exact. You're just looking for something similar. I also have another little branch that comes off there. Now for these are more translucent. You can kind of see through those leaves a bit more. So I'm gonna use a lighter color. It's up to you if you want to use a lighter color. I'm gonna also use, this is my number 4 brush, and it is a flat brush. So if you have a flat brush, that is what I would recommend using. And this goes back to doing those round leaves like we did earlier. Now, I also will recommend turning your cookie. So because I would need to start my leaf down here, like I'll do one as an example. I can start one here and add that pressure and then pull up on it. But sometimes I just feel like it's a little awkward to pull up. Sometimes I prefer to pull towards myself. So when I actually would do this for myself, I would flip the cookie because it's more comfortable for me to paint, but I don't want to have to flip the picture and do all that stuff. So I am just going to do it upside down. Well, not upside down. You know what I mean? Right side up. Now this is a pretty big leaf. So we'll see if we can get a leaf that looks that big with our paintbrush. So I'm starting with a lot of pressure and pulling up. And I feel like that's half the leaf. So I'm actually going to go in and do a second half. This one is like our curve, so I'm using the edge of my paintbrush and pulling up. So again, I'm not using the flat side of my paintbrush like this. I'm turning it 90 degrees, and that's how I'm adding these leaves. So they all start with a lot of pressure, and then I reduce and release that pressure. And you just kind of keep adding them until you like the way it looks. And again, you can kind of change the amount of color that you add, how dark the paint is that you're using. So you've got something that looks pretty similar. And when you're changing that pressure, you're also changing how much paint is coming off your paintbrush. So that's how I get these kind of different variations in color within each leaf to make it look a bit more realistic. All right, moving on to our last one. This one is a fun one because you definitely can't mess this up because all of those leaves are completely different shapes. So I'm going back in with a skinny brush. And then I see I've got a branch going straight up. I've got one to the side here and then another to the side there. So I'm going to do the same thing on my cookie. I'm going to do one that goes straight up, one that kind of branches off here, and then another that branches off there. And I'm actually going to use that same brush. What was it? The number 4, I believe, that we used for the last one. Number 4, yes. And this, I'm really going to just mimic what I see. So this one back here looks like a normal, it looks like a normal leaf shape. So I can start with a lot of that pressure and go up. But this one looks like a weird line. So I'm going to kind of just do a line in there. And I'm really going to just work my way down and focus on what I'm actually seeing, not what I think eucalyptus should look like, right? Because we have an idea of what eucalyptus should look like, and it would be these perfect little circles that go down a branch. But what I'm seeing here are not perfect little circles. I'm seeing kind of like crazy shapes with varying colors and all kinds of stuff. So I'm just going in, and then there's like a big one here, and then another one kind of over here that is a little wavier. There's 2 that kind of curve up here, but again, they're all so different. And that is what gives it that look. And they do overlap, like these two overlap, so I can overlap them here. And then we've got some smaller ones on the side. More round one. And there you go. So the big takeaway from this is just use a real photo of something you want to paint and then look for the unique qualities about it. And that's what you're going to focus on. And that's how you're going to decide how to create those different leaf shapes. So if we look at all these together, maybe you've got a bunch of different options for greenery. And these would all make nice little accents on a cookie. So like when you get quick, you could do this in pretty much no time, throw a little initial on here and boom, you've got a beautiful little accent cookie for a bridal shower set or whatever it may be. I mean, or even just a standalone cookie to add in. Any questions on greenery before we move on to our flowers? All right. If you think of a question, like I said, don't hesitate to stop me and ask.
Emily, I do have a question real quick.
Yeah, sure.
Something that helps me so much with your descriptions is comparing it to something like I have my royal icing now because of your toothpaste analogy and things like that. What would you say is kind of a visual for how to get the water to food coloring balance right? Because I am, and I guess that takes practice too, but like one of my cookies is like, the icing is kind of like melting under the water, so I know I need less.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. And one that I honestly, I don't think I've actually thought about it because I think I take for granted that I don't know, it just is sometimes second nature. But what I usually look for is, so this is like a darker color, right? For my darker colors, I'm looking for very, very little water on my plate. Like I could add a ton on here. And if it's puddling up like this, that's probably going to be too much. Now, if you need a lighter color to paint with, then you are going to have more water on your plate. And that is where it would be so important to dab that off before you paint on the cookie. Like let me show you an example. So like if I go right in with this light green color in here and paint on the cookie, then I'm going to start getting that puddle on there. And that is like, if I can tip this and it drips, then that is too much. That's too much water on there.
Mm-hmm.
If
Sure.
I do the same thing and kind of tap that excess off and paint next to it, it is a little lighter. So I might have to go over it once or twice like that. But when I hold this up, you'll notice that that's not dripping. So that's a better amount of water and it's not going to eat away at the cookie so much. When I'm dealing with the darker colors, what I look for is more like, I'm trying to think of a good, you want it to be, and this is going to sound kind of crazy, you want it to be thicker than, look a little thicker than just plain water. So like I pull, it should have more of like a paint consistency to it. I I wish I had like a good, like a something to compare it to. That's what I'm trying to think of. And I can't think of like an exact thing to compare it to because it's not going to be as thick as like honey, right? That's way too thick.
Mhm. Sure.
But
But like,
so much of it is just the feel that we're looking
okay.
for. So I don't know if that helps, but
Yeah. Just thinking about like, I just went back to what it would look like if I was using a real watercolor palette like the kids have in school.
yes.
And how you don't want to drown the colors, but just make it be enough to get the color up from the palette.
Yep, and that was actually something. So I recently have started doing like the paintings and scanning them and then printing them on cookies. But if you have a watercolor paint palette at home to play around with, like a kid's one, a Crayola one, whatever it is, that honestly is a great way to see that to kind of like figure out that consistency and how much water to add. Because like you said, if you're adding so much, and it does have a different consistency to it than just literally like dipping your brush in a bowl of water and trying to paint with it. So playing around with that too, and just kind of getting a feel for how much you add is another great way to kind of like visualize it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
All right. Okay, so the next thing that we are going to look at is the fun part, and that is our florals. And, oops, sorry, I got more people in the waiting room here. So our florals, the first thing that you want to do is going to be so similar to the greenery and what we've been talking about, and really looking at the flower that you're trying to paint. Again, I like painting from real flowers, real flower photos. So I like to start by just finding a photo of a flower that I like, and then I look at it. So if I'm looking at this flower, for example, I'm looking at what are the imperfections, what makes this flower unique. It's not just a simple flower with how many petals? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. A flower with 8 perfect petals around. You'll notice that this petal overlaps that petal. And this is, as far as flower goes, this is a pretty uniform flower, but there are still these little nuances, like the overlapping of those 2 petals, or this petal overlaps those 2. There's some texture in those petals. There is darker color in the middle with some lighter color on the edges. So it all depends how exact you want to paint the flower, but I just like to look at what is imperfect, and that's where I want to start. That's kind of what I want to focus on and what I want to paint in the flower that I'm looking at. So it really should not be perfect. We're not looking for perfection. So we're going to start with some large statement flowers, and it can be overwhelming when you look at flowers because there's so many petals. Like if we look at this guy here, there's tons of petals in there, and it's like you could spend all day long trying to make the perfect flower look just like this. This is another tricky one. It's we're looking at it from a different angle. We know what that flower looks like. If we look at this flower dead on, we would expect it to look like this one. But it could make a really fun design if instead of painting a flower dead on like this, we paint it from the side. So by looking at these photos of the flowers, we can create more interesting floral designs. So the first flower that I want to paint is actually one of these little guys down here. And I like these because it's not directly head on of view of the flower, but it's simple. There's only 5 petals, and it will give us a nice starting place. So what I like to do, if you have your workbook printed, or if when you're getting started painting, to kind of train yourself to look at the real shape, not the shape that you expect it to be, but the real actual shape of the petal. I like to outline it. So for example, this flower here, I noticed that this is a pretty uniform, predictable petal shape. But as I go to the side here, this one, and all I'm doing is outlining exactly what's on there. is much skinnier. So these two petals are not the same shape. They're not the same size. Same thing on the side here. I would say those two side ones I drew are similar, but they both curve up a little bit. And then if we look at these two front petals, they're totally different. So we've got this one that sort of overlaps that one on the side and is more like a jelly bean. And this one here, which is similar, but maybe even like, it's like a bigger jelly bean, I'll say. So if we look at these shapes, that is what we want to mimic in our painting. We are not just simply drawing or painting a flower that looks like this this is hard to draw on here, so excuse my not so great sketch here. But do you see the difference between painting a flower of what we would expect, which is when you think flower, you think, 5 nice petals, all look the same, dead center and all that kind of thing, versus this, where we've got 3 petals, 1 that is a predictable petal shape, 2 that are kind of cockeyed to the side, and then 2 that look like little jelly beans in the front. But if you put those all together, it's going to make a beautiful, realistic looking flower. So that's what we're gonna do. If you have space on one of your smaller circles that you did the greenery on, you can use those. Or if you want to get a fresh cookie, you can. This will be one of those other big ones that I recommended having made. Okay, I'm gonna paint this one with, those were all round petals. So I'm gonna, again, I think I'm gonna use this flat paintbrush. I'm really liking this. Maybe I'll go with the bigger flat paintbrush. We already used that smaller one. I'm gonna use the number 8. So the number 8 paintbrush is what I'm gonna use, and I'm gonna go in with my yellowy ivory color. So since we were just talking about how to actually make the paint, I guess now that I'm thinking about it, I'm gonna let me pull this water off here so I can redo it. What I typically do, especially if I don't already have color kind of mixed together, like I do for my green, I will dip my paintbrush in my bowl of water and just kind of add like a little puddle on my plate. And then from there, I will take a little bit of that color and mix it in. Now that is really heavy on the water, right? That's a pretty good puddle. So what I typically do, and again, I haven't really thought about this until this moment, but what I usually do is I will kind of like spread a little bit of that water over and grab a little more pigment and mix it in. So it's like I have my main puddle here, but I don't typically paint with my main puddle, if that makes sense. I kind of drag a little over and add a little bit more of that color to thicken it in a little bit. And then I sort of have like this ombre effect where I have like my darker shades over here, and then I can dip into this side if I need, something that's a bit lighter. So to paint that flower, and if you have your workbook in front of you, great. If not, I know what it looks like because I've painted it a time or two. So I'm just gonna paint from memory here. But I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna get some paint on my brush. Again, I'm using the number 8. I'm using a flat brush. And I'm gonna do these petals in 2 strokes. So I'm gonna go, not use the flat part because I don't want a straight line. I'm gonna use the edge, and I'm gonna start at where I would have like the center of my flower be, and then kind of make like a little crescent shape, and that's gonna be half of my petal. You're kind of getting a bad glare here. Let me see if that's better. And then I'm gonna do the same thing, but I'm gonna go the opposite way to kind of close that petal. And I kind of like when I have this darker shade down here because it makes it look more like it's the center of that flower. So that was my more predictable petal. Then I'm gonna do the same type of thing, but probably only with 1 stroke on the side. And I'm not going to try to touch the edge of my 2 petals together. I'm just gonna start with a good amount of pressure and kind of scoop it up. I'm gonna make mine a little darker because I feel like it's a little bit hard to see in the camera. So we've got these ones in the back. I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. So I'm always painting with like with the skinny part facing me or facing up. And again, if you don't add enough pressure the first time, you just go back in and push down a little harder to make a wider petal. So those are my first 3 petals. And then if you remember, those second 2 petals were in the front and they were our jelly bean petals. They were like long and skinny. So I'm gonna just add 2 petals, one in the front here and one in the front there. And then of course, this flower had that center with those little, I don't know what you want to call them, those long, like, I really don't have a word for those. Those pokey things. I wish I had something better than pokey things, but. And I don't know, I'm gonna make them blue because whiskers, that is a great, yes, thank you, Katie. I like that. Little whiskers in the center. That's so much better than pokey things. I'm gonna make it blue because why not? This blue for me is too bright. So to tone that blue down a little bit, I'm just gonna add a little tiny dot of the opposite color on the color wheel, which is orange. Oh, stamen? Stamen? That
Stamen.
sounds like the real name. I don't know if I said it right.
Stamen.
Stamen. All right, well, that is what I'm painting. I'm painting the stamen. So just adding a tiny little bit of orange to my blue gave me a more toned down color. And I'll start in the middle and kind of, so this is a perfect example of where you would want to make sure that you have more pigment and way less water, because if you add too much water for these, then it's going to bleed into your other petals if it's still wet. So I like to kind of do it with heavier, have like a little bit more of the color rather than having it be really light. Plus then you also wouldn't be able to see it. And just kind of add those in the center. And one trick that I also like to do to make it look more realistic is have these front petals cover up some of the center. So right now my front petal does not cover up the center. So what I would do is kind of come in here and go like that. And I'll wipe some of that blue away out of there. Still a little wet. And then you've got a cute little flower. And we could do multiple, you know, add a couple of them in there. Make it darker. Another trick to doing that is do your back 3 leaves first, then jump in there and add your stamen. I love that I know what to call those now. And add those after you do your first 3 petals. And then go back in, and then you can add those front ones. And you've got cute little flowers. Well, if you're still painting, might as well add some greenery. So there's really no right or wrong way. And then you've got a nice little painted flower. But if you think about it, if you compare that to doing something that, you know, might be a little bit more predictable, right? Like a flower with perfect, let me see, let me get this cookie. With perfect petals, because I could do the same thing, right? I could go petal, 2 petals, 3 petal, 4 petal, 5 petal, and then add a center. And still cute, still pretty. But if you compare the two, this one to me looks more realistic, looks more interesting. This looks more basic. So again, all preference. Now we're gonna follow that exact same idea, but with a different flower. We're gonna take a look at this pink one. I love painting this pink one just because I think if you really look at the shape of those petals, it's weird looking, honestly. If we outline these petals, we've got one like this, so a nice round petal. We've got another one that's like a little shorter, and all of these have kind of a ruffly edge. But then you've got this one here that's long and skinny. And same thing, one that's long and kind of skinny on the side. And then you've got these front ones that are much shorter. And this one kind of even curves upward. These two, I feel like almost look like, I don't know why this is what came to mind, but flippers, like flippers that you would wear in the ocean if you're scuba diving. But that's what I first thought of when I saw these two petals. And these two kind of like curve, and then these two are your more round standard petals. So if we think about that and we think about this size, and we've got this center that sits on top of all of those, then we can paint this. But again, you always want to look at the unique shapes of those petals. So let's paint that one. I'm gonna, what color should I do? I'm thinking pink. I'm gonna use the number 8 again for this. And I'm gonna go in with a pink color. So again, I just add some water to it and I pull a little bit of that coloring. My pink, for whatever reason, is a little funky and it almost looks gritty. I don't really know why. So now I have a nice paint ready to go. And I'm gonna start with those. There were 2 in the back that looked like normal petals. So I'll do the same idea with the side of my brush. With pressure and do 1/2. There's a little too much water on my brush, so I kind of just pulled some off. And I also like that those petals that we saw had that like kind of wavy edge. So I'm also gonna go in and just kind of give it like a little bit of an edge. Let me see if I can zoom in a little so that you can get a better look. So I'm gonna do the same thing right next to it and kind of give it that wavy edge. And I'm starting with that pressure. And these ones were a little wider on the top. They weren't pointy. Then the 2 on the outside next to those were those long ones that scooped up a little, and they were skinnier than those. So we're gonna kind of scoop out, and notice that this time I have that thicker part, so I could also start this way and then pull in. That's a better way to do it. I don't know why I didn't do it that way the first time. So you want to start with a lot of pressure on the outside and then pull as you pull in towards the center of the flower. You will release that. I'm gonna redo this petal. I don't like the way it looks. And if you have too much water on there, like I just did, just add. And then those two front ones were like the flippers. So the wide part, we're gonna start with a lot of pressure and then pull it in. And same thing on the other side. Start with a lot of pressure and then pull it in. So then we've got this flower. And here's a little trick. So that center of that flower, it sat on top of it, but you'll see that I have all this dark pink. So if I try to go in with a yellow right now, it'll look like a muddy mess. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna put a pretty decent amount of water on a smaller paintbrush. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm just gonna use the number 4. And I'm going to kind of just add water in the center. And I know that goes against everything I've said because it puddles up, but then I'm gonna dry my brush off. And I do wanna kind of work quickly. I'm gonna dry my brush off as best as I can. I'm gonna use it to soak that water back up and wipe it off, soak that water back up and wipe it off. And what that did was remove that pink so that now I can go in there and add a little more water in there and add a yellow center. So I erased the pink. And now if I'm like stippling and I want that kind of textured look, I will put more pigment on my brush and then I just simply dab it in there. And it's nice to have different, again, different variations of the color. So I added like a tiny bit of blue. And that's going to be much heavier on the color rather than having work. And you've got a nice little painted flower. And this one had a nice stem, so add a stem. When you're doing your flower petals, how do you space them so you don't end up with a hole? That's a good question. How do I space them so I don't end up with a hole? Sometimes I space them really well, sometimes I don't. Do you mean a hole? Actually, I should ask this. Do you mean a hole in the center of the flower or like a hole or space between the petals?
Sorry, can you see mine?
Oh, yeah.
See that?
Okay,
giant
so like
hole?
right in the middle there. Honestly, I would just add another petal.
Okay.
So like sometimes that happens and sometimes you aren't like, you just have a space and it like looks funky or you don't like the way it looks. So I just would literally add another one. If it's in the front like that too, especially, what I would do is add a petal in the front that is kind of like shorter and just kind of like swings it almost like, let me do an example. So like if you have a situation where your flower ends up looking like, so you've got a petal here, a petal there, but then you've got like this center space. I would kind of do like a little, almost like a skinnier petal in the center, if that makes sense. Yeah, because you don't want it to be too long and be longer than those other two. I would do it just kind of in the middle, and to fill that space. So basically you fake it and fudge it until it looks good enough. That's what I do, at least. Okay, the last big statement flower that I want to do is a rose because roses are, I feel like, used so often and also can be intimidating. So this rose, what we're looking for is the pattern of the petals. Why isn't it giving me my, there it goes, needed my pen. So you'll notice that all of these kind of, they circle around and they're like this crescent shape. So if we go to outline again, obviously we're not going to be able to outline all of the shapes, all of the petals in a rose because there's so many of them, but they do follow this general shape and this general pattern of like this moon pretty much. And they start out pretty compact. And then as they go out, you've got some bigger moon shapes. And again, I'm kind of combining like multiple petals, but they follow this pattern. And then as you get to the edge, you can see that they're not perfect moons. They kind of have this curved, papery look on the edge there. So that's what we're seeing when we have a rose. So when we want to paint a rose, those are the shapes that we're looking for. So when we're doing a moon shape, that would be two pointed ends. So I always like to use a tapered brush for my roses. And I think we'll do a pretty big rose. I think, do I want to use a real big one? I'll go in with the number 3 again. I was going to use a different brush, but I think the number 3 will be just fine. So let's do a red rose. Well, I'll do a red rose. You can do whatever color you want. I'm gonna just, oh, that is orange and not red. Whoops. Actually, a peach rose. A peach rose would be pretty. So to make my peach, I've got my orange. Wow, that is bright orange. And I'm gonna add some pink to it to give it a peachy color.
What brush?
Emily, what number brush are you using
Oh,
right now?
sorry, this is the number 3.
Okay.
Number 3 brush. I went really heavy in there with the orange, but that's okay. And that's super bright, so I think I want to tone it down. It's very orangey, so I'm going to add just a tiny, tiny little dot of blue to it, and that will kind of balance out that orange. All right, that looks good enough. I don't know. We'll see if we like this color or not. Could be interesting. So to start, what I do is I actually go in with a very light color. I, of course, made this super dark, so I'm going to just add a little extra water over here and spread some of that color into it. And I'm going to start with a light color. And all I'm going to do is go around in circles with crescent shapes. So crescent shapes, again, we're going to start with, in the center, they're going to be small. So I'll start with a little bit of pressure and add more pressure and then a little pressure. And I'm kind of just going to go in circles. I don't have to worry too much about, I don't have to worry about any white gaps. The white gaps are actually going to be kind of nice for us. And what you want to do if you've ever made roses with royal icing or with any kind of icing, buttercream, you know that you always add your next petal to overlap the seam of the other two, if that makes sense. So for example, I've got 2 petals that kind of meet here. I'm going to do my next crescent around there. And this is an example of where I use the side of my brush a lot. And then you can kind of give it a little wiggle because your rose petals are never just perfect crescents. And you just kind of keep adding and adding and adding, going around in circles. And I leave white space between all of them, and I'll show you why in just a second.
No, there's chips. Yeah. There's those taco things in there.
So we're going around in circles. And you can make it as big or as small as you want. I'll do it like a nice big rose. No worries, Amy. Okay, so once you have your first layer of like a light color, you'll notice that you have all of these white spaces between, then you can go in with a darker color. And I like to layer it because roses have so many petals and so many layers to them. I mimic that same thing with my, as I paint. So again, I'm not going directly on top. You can really do this kind of messily. So I'll just kind of go in circles. So I'm not worried about covering the light pink. I'm not worried about covering the white. I'm honestly just kind of adding those crescents around and around as I go. Still following the same sort of rule where like if I have two petals that meet there, then I will put another petal around it. And I tend to turn my cookie as I go too. I don't know. That's just, you can do that if you want, or you don't have to. Doesn't really matter. And then as I get to the outside edge, I do make my petals thicker and I give them that more squiggly edge to make them look like a petal, not like a perfect. So you can see that like at the edge, I'm really pressing hard down on my paintbrush. Oh, sorry, I just realized my hand was probably in the way for that for a lot. And if you really want to go crazy and go in with a third layer of even darker color, that will add even more depth. I would do less and less though as I go. So these can just kind of be like little accents. So you can see I'm definitely this third round with the darkest color. I'm not adding a ton of it. Just little bits here and there. And then you've got a rose that was pretty simple. Didn't take us long. And it definitely looks like a rose. So the key with roses is just working in layers. Working in layers, starting with those crescent shapes that are really light color, and then going in with a little bit of a darker color crescent, and then adding those darker accents. And there's a rose. So those are the 3 statement flowers that we'll do today. Because I want to make sure that we have time to kind of put it all together. I'm already at it's already 2:30, so an hour and a half. Am I going too fast or are we okay? All right. We did our statement flowers. The next thing, and this is so simple, but adds so much to any design. And these are your little, your delicate little, I don't know, I call them like filler flowers. And for the filler flowers, what I like to do is add, we'll be rewatching so many times. That's what the recordings are for. So for your filler flowers, I always start with branches for those. These are some of my favorites to do. I call them filler flowers, but I've done cookies that like just have these types of little flowers. There is no specific technique to them. All I like to do is give myself a little branch and maybe branch some more off of them. Add little branches. Again, if you look at the pictures in your workbook, you can do similar styles, similar patterns to those to help you. But a lot of the times for these, I just kind of do whatever will fit in my design and look nice. So it usually consists of skinny little lines and wispy branches. And then I like to use the smallest, the shortest brush that I have for out of these skinny brushes. So the shortest brush. And then I go in with whatever color I'm feeling. And I just do simple little taps. And I do like to do it while the branches are still wet because it sometimes, you know, sort of combines the, I don't know, it just sometimes makes the green of the branch and the color that I'm using for the little flowers to blend together, and it just looks nice. But I really just tap. So I didn't do anything miraculous here. I started and I did one layer of a lighter blue, and then I went in with touches of that darker blue. Adding two different colors, and not two different colors, two different shades of the same color, just makes it look a little more realistic, adds some depth to it. I think it's just like a nice little touch. If I do a split branch like this, I'll maybe tap and add some on this side, little like puffs. Yes, I do use the same brush for the taps. I think when I did the branches, I used maybe a longer one, but you could use any of those tiny little detail brushes. And there is really no right way, no wrong way. One thing that I will recommend is always making sure that you're overlapping it, overlapping the stem. So leaving some of the stem visible, and then overlapping it, I'm going in with a darker color. So you can see adding that little bit of a darker color on top, just the touches, makes such a difference. I'm trying to make it so you don't have a glare here. It just makes it look a little bit more realistic. And of course, you could add some leaves to those plants. The same way we've been doing. And that's how I do filler flowers. I don't have a better name for them. But these are always, when I'm doing a design, I love adding them in there. I think it just rounds out a whole floral design when you add them in there. And they're pretty. I also love doing these all together. So like if I painted this whole cookie and filled the whole cookie up with these, I think that would be a really pretty design. Or doing them around, like if it's a plaque, having something in the center with these little filler flowers kind of spreading out all around the edges. I think that's really fun. These are super quick, super simple, and just pretty, honestly. They're honestly always some of my favorites. The next part is going to be combining the things that we've learned. So combining all of our different types of flowers, our greenery to make a design. How did I do the fan leaves? Like these leaves with the blue flower or the ones with the yellow flower? The golden flower. For those, I used my short brush again. So I used the same brush that I used for these tapping, adding the flowers, and I just went the reverse way. So when I did these leaves here, I started at the stem, added a little pressure, and then added more pressure. But for these, I did it the opposite way. For those, I used the side of my brush and started with a lot of pressure and then pulled in and released that pressure. So just started with heavy pressure and then pulled in with less pressure. That's how I made those leaves. Does that help? Hopefully my hand wasn't in the way. Oh my gosh, I just threw a cookie. I was gonna do another one on this one. But just to show that leaf again, I start with a lot of pressure and then pull towards and release that pressure. And that's how I make those little leaves. Okay, let's put all of this together so that we can make some designs. Let me share my screen actually and go back to this workbook. So I have a kind of a process to follow that I hope is helpful when you are actually designing florals. So general tips are what we've already talked about. You're looking for real bouquets, real wreaths, or swag as inspiration for the cookies. That's my preference, personally. But that can also look overwhelming. Like there's no way that I would sit here and say you should paint this exact same thing on a cookie because there's so much going on. So what I like to do is choose, if I see a picture, I choose 3 to 5. And when I say 3 to 5, typically it's 3. Because I like to speed up the process. So 3 to 5 main statement flowers from the photo, and that will be the focal point of your design. That's also going to be your starting point. You're going to start by doing those 3 main flowers. And then just like we did the rose, you're going to always start with kind of mapping it out with those light colors and then go back in and add those dark colors to really round out the design. And then for the painting process, this is kind of the orders. If I'm putting a bunch of florals together, I like to start with my statement flowers, like I mentioned. Then I'll add some branches in there and my leaves, my greenery. And then I'll follow in with that, that filler and those small flowers and just kind of see what else it needs. And that's how I would go about doing a nice floral design. So let's start with, if you have a square left or another large cookie, we can do a design on that. I have like a really big square, so that will work. Okay, now on this square, I'm gonna kind of do this sort of from memory. If you would want to look up a floral design or a pattern, you can do it that way. But I'm basically going to just combine the different flowers that we've learned into one design. So I'm gonna start with my main statement flower, and my main statement flower is going to be a rose. So just as a reminder, for the rose, here's what it looks like. We used a tapered brush. I am gonna go back in with the number 3 brush. And I'll use the same color that I did before. So for my rose, I'm gonna start and I'm just mapping it out. So I'm starting with a statement flower and I'm doing light colors. And my rose is gonna be my focal point. I'm thinking I'm gonna do a design with like a big flower here, and it's gonna kind of hang down this way and kind of extend over that way. If I was making this into a cookie, I could put like a wedding date or something in the corner. So I'll start with my crescents, and I always, whenever I do floral designs, I like to kind of not necessarily have all of the flower on the cookie. So I'll probably start the center of my rose. That is way too much water. Start the center of my rose up here with my crescents. And it's going to kind of go off the corner and be not perfectly centered. And I'm just gonna kind of outline it, give myself a map. So it's sort of in my corner here. And that's good to start. So boom, quick, easy, nothing, nothing too in-depth and too detailed. Then I think my next flower I want to do, I'm going to do this flower, but I'm going to kind of, if you can envision it, I'm going to have it, how do I want to do it? I'm going to put it on the side here as if it's kind of in a, so facing this direction, sort of. So I'll jump in there with pink. And those are my more round leaves. So I'm gonna use my flat paintbrush and it's gonna be a number 4. So my number 4 will look something like this, where I give myself a lot of pressure in the top and then pull down, a lot of pressure and pull down, more pressure up top and pull down. So those are my 3 normal, if you want to call them normal leaves. And then I've got one that scoops in, another that scoops in, and I'll put one in the middle here, like that. And I like these little flowers, so we can add those in there too. Why not? I'm going to use the same brush for those. And I'm just going to sort of add those. I'm going to add them here. Again, you can do this however you like. There is no right or wrong. I am literally just taking the exact flowers that we have already painted and adding them in. So all I've done is just mapped it out with light colors. I think I'll add a second one of those. So far, that's what we're looking at. So step 1 was add my statement flowers. I added my statement flowers. I did it in a light color. Now I'm gonna go back in with my skinny detail brush and I'm gonna add some branches and some greenery. Still working with a light, more of like a wash of a color. And really, I can add a combination of branches or leaves. I think I'll add some hanging ones. There's, again, 0 right or wrong way to do this. You don't want to overpower it, so less is more. So I added some branches. Now I'm going to go in with a bigger tapered brush and just add some simple greenery in a very light shade. So I know I'm going fast, but that's really because you can do this however you want. There is truly add as much greenery or as little as you would like. The big thing that we're focusing on here is kind of filling in the space and using light colors. So now I'm going to add some big, that is too pink, from the pink that was in my water. I'm going to just add some leaves. I do not like that color. So I'm just doing leaves like we've been doing the whole class. Okay, now that we sort of have this mapped out, now I would suggest going back in and adding more color. So let's actually finish this rose. We have the light color. We're going to add that medium shade on top and then followed by a dark shade. So we're going in with the crescents again. And we're basically just repeating everything we've already done and putting them next to each other on one cookie rather than separate cookies. Now, if you have an order where you're painting a lot, so if you're doing like, say, 6 of this design, the way that I like to do it to make sure that I can do them and make them look relatively similar and make the process speed up, I'll do them in sections. So like if I'm doing 6 of these, I would have done, first I'll paint one by itself as kind of my template. So I would do this cookie by itself, have it completely finished. Then for the rest of them, and that would be my reference. Then for the rest of them, I would have them all lined up and I would go through and add the base layer of the rose on all 6 of them. Then I would add the base layer of this pink flower on all 6 of the cookies. And then I would add these 2 golden flowers on all 6 of the cookies. So I would go through and do each step of the process on all 6 cookies and just keep going until I have done the entire design on all 6 cookies. So I start by doing just one by itself and then follow the rest of them. I use that as my template and work in sections pretty much. And it just makes the designs look consistent. And I feel that it goes quicker. I guess that could be different for everybody, but I do enjoy doing it that way. Add a little bit more pink. And like for these pink petals, I'm really not going to do too much with them. I'm just going to add a little extra to them. I'll also add a center. In there. And I also need to add a center to my little gold flowers. And now you start to see this design come alive. I like to finish off the design with my more small details, my small florals, my small greenery, and they can also be more of a pop of color. So I'm gonna use even a darker green and I'm gonna add some of these leaves off those branches that I added. So for these, again, I'm just starting with a lot of pressure and then releasing to add a point to the end. And don't be afraid to add some of those in between your flowers that you already have on there and let them overlap and all that kind of good stuff. And my absolute favorite part is always adding those little filler greenery. So I'm gonna make this guy a filler. And maybe I'll add another one that comes out here. Make it blue. And like I said, I like to go in and just add touches of that same color, just a darker shade. And then you've got a nice floral design. So we've got our 3 statement flowers. We had the bigger greenery, and then at the end we filled in with the lighter, the smaller details in darker colors. Amy, I'm just seeing your question here. Do I do that with all of my sets? Doing one complete cookie for every design is great. Yeah, you know what? I do that pretty often, unless it's like a design that I have done multiple times and I don't like need a template design, then I won't do it. But for the most part, yeah, I'll do one all together and finish it. And then I always have that kind of next to me as a reference. And then I'll do the rest of them all in stages. It's funny, when I was a teacher, that was like, if you think about it as grading tests, you have like your answer key. And then when I would grade my tests, I would obviously have my answer key with me, but then I would grade all of my students' tests like page by page, because you just get into more of a rhythm. And I know it seems silly, but like, you're not wasting time dipping your brush to rinse your brush each time. You're just doing the same flower 6 times in a row and then rinsing once, and then doing the next flower 6 times in a row and rinsing. So you're saving time in little areas, but you'd be surprised, it really does add up there. So yeah, I highly recommend making yourself your own little answer key or template, whatever you would like to call it. All right, let's see what we got next. We have 2 more things to do. Thank you for bearing with me. I know we're at a like 2-hour mark here. So totally understand if you need to go. I think I did put that the class would be 2 hours. Last time I advertised it as 1 hour and I went way over. It took way longer than I thought. So if you need to go, again, you will still get the recording and all that stuff. So totally understand that. But I will finish up. We're going to do a bouquet and then a floral wreath, which are 2 designs that are great. I add bouquets into my bridal shower sets like all the time. It's a go-to for me. I'll leave this here in case you're still painting. A bouquet is, yeah, that's a go-to design that I'll add in there. And then a floral wreath, that's another one that is just, it's pretty and it's really not too difficult, because you don't have to make, like, the most difficult one I would say is this guy, because you do have those bigger statement flowers that, you know, you do need to make sure look like a flower. So, all right, let's jump right into a bouquet. Bouquet is going to follow the same process. We are going to start with our statement flowers. The hardest part about a bouquet is making sure the bouquet is centered. I'm actually going to follow a similar process to the way we did this one. I'll do a similar color scheme to this one. And we started with the rose for the last one. So let's start with the rose again for this one. Now, because this is a smaller design, I'm not going to work in layers quite as much. I am going to pretty much just jump right in and paint the whole thing all together. So I'm going to start with a rose. I'm using one of my detail brushes. You can use any of the detail brushes that you have. I'm never going to put something directly in the center. It just will draw your eye right to the center, and it doesn't move your eye around the design as much. So I'm going to kind of go a little off to the center. I'm still making these little crescent shapes, but they can be, you know, they don't need to be super neat. So boom, rose is done. Then I'll go in and I'll add a pink flower, similar to this guy. And I'm going to kind of break it up. I'm going to make like a triangle. So we've got petal, 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 petal. So you'll notice these are really, they are not perfect. Let's try to get that glare out of here. And then I'll go in and add my 2 little gold flowers. And Remember, I'm working in a triangle, so with your bouquet, you want to work in a triangle, that way you can make it even. Now this little gold one, I mean, if you really look at these guys, they are, I mean, this guy up here doesn't even look like a flower, which is fine, because if just all you need to do is give the illusion of a flower. I'm also going to add gold in the center of this one. And then we will go in and add stems, because after all, it is a bouquet. So they're all going to kind of meet. And there is a fourth flower, so I'll add a fourth stem. All right, we've got the main thing down, and it really is not looking too pretty, but trust the process here. We're gonna add some extra stems. So we are gonna add one kind of coming up this way. We'll add one that comes down that way, maybe another that sprays off this way. So we're just kind of adding some extra stems. And now we can go in. So we did our statement flowers. Next up was adding in some greenery. So we'll add some light color greenery to make sure we have it all filled in, and then we'll add those accent colors at the end. So just add some leaves. And when I do my leaves, I like to just simply add, start at the, honestly, it's all random. Start at the stem and just kind of add pressure and then release that pressure. So we've added some light colors for some greenery, and then we can go fill in with some of our statement flowers, or not, I'm sorry, not our statement flowers, our filler flowers. And they don't even, I mean, you can add them in whichever way you want. If you want to just kind of tuck them in here. I do like to make sure I have like maybe 2 areas with the statement flowers to kind of balance it out. And then we'll go back in with those darker, more detailed greenery. So add stem. And you do want to make sure that your leaves are always coming from a stem. If they're not, then it can start to look a little jumbled and less realistic. And then you have a nice bouquet. And if you feel like right now I'm looking at this and I think that those green leaves stand out too much, so I'm going to balance them a little bit by adding some darker colors into my flowers, like maybe a little bit of a darker blue. I'll add the centers like we did earlier in those. And I'll add some of this darker orange or peach color for my rose. And we can, let's do a little, could do a little bow around it. So there you go. You've got a bouquet. So again, for your bouquet, what you're doing is you're working with 3 main statement flowers and you're doing them in a triangle, slightly off-centered triangle. You're adding your stems. Then you're going to add in some light greenery to fill in the white space. Add some filler flowers. I forgot to add some dark blue to this filler flower. Add your filler flowers, and then you're going to finish off with some of the darker greenery and smaller leaves that are more defined. And there's your bouquet. And we're going to follow that exact same process with a wreath. And that will be our last design for the class, is a wreath. So I feel like I'm a broken record at this point, but we are starting again with our statement flowers. And this is also a great example of how I would create a set that is cohesive, but still different design. So like this set still goes along with this bouquet. That's because I did the same type of flower in the same colors. I followed the same process and incorporated those same colors in both designs. And so they go together, they still look cohesive, and I'll do the same for this this wreath here. If you like this cookie cutter, this is a Frosted by Megan cookie cutter. I think it's just like her floral half wreath. I do typically like to do this cutter because it's not a wreath like all the way around. I start with circles pretty much, usually. And this can be really loose and wispy. Then I will add in my florals. So I'm starting with my rose again, like I did the past 2 times, and I'm gonna pick random places, honestly. I think this is a nice big section here, so that's where I'm gonna put the rose to start. And then I will add in those statement flowers elsewhere. So we've got a rose marked out on there. I'll do my pink flower. I do like to have kind of those statement flowers not on the edges. I like to have them closer to the center. So we've got my pink flower. And we'll do 2 little yellows. So just like with the bouquet, this is not very beautiful to start by any means, but it will look pretty when we finish. Then I'm gonna go in with a light color and do some bigger pieces, bigger leaves, some greenery. And I just carry it out to the edge so that it fills in a lot of the space that we've got, a lot of the white space. I like to, around the top, have it point out this way. In the middle, it'll kind of be pointing in, and then once I get to the bottom, it'll point in the opposite direction. So it's always kind of going around that wreath. So it's starting to look better. It is still not pretty, and that is okay. Then I'll go in and add some area where I want some darker, more detailed greenery, as well as some of those filler flowers. So this is going to be a filler flower. I like to make sure some of it is hanging over into the center of the wreath as well. And then we'll add some of those little leaves. And don't be afraid to overlap things. And of course, our filler flowers. So I don't really love that I just did blue here and blue here. I'm gonna add a little bit of that blue accent throughout the center as well. Maybe just a little bit in here. And now we can go in with those darker colors. Like this to fill in the rose. Ooh, that reflection isn't great. So we've got the rose. We'll add centers on our other flowers. Like my pink. And oops. And there you go. Now you've got a floral wreath that goes along with your other designs. Again, the key thing with these types of floral designs is just making sure that you're following that process of statement flowers first, then adding in those light green, and then going in with those deeper colors and in smaller details. So that covers it all. I know that was so much and like rapid fire there at the end. I will stay on and hang out if you've got questions or you want to see me paint anything else that I didn't get to, or you just whatever. I will hang out here. But if you need to go, I will maybe see you in the next class or not. But thank you so much for joining me. I had so much fun and I hope you guys had fun painting. So thanks for hanging out.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I don't do cookies. I do more of cake pops, and I do poppy paint.
Okay.
Do the gel color work on chocolate?
Do the gel colors work on chocolate? Honestly, I have not tried doing gel on chocolate. I'm not sure how it
Okay.
would dry.
No,
Yeah,
it
I
doesn't
am-
work.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
Oh, it doesn't. Someone else has
Yeah,
tried
Well,
it.
I have never painted it on after it's dried, but if you try to color like white chocolate, then
Right, white
it
chocolate.
seizes up.
Yeah, I did know that. If you like you have to use the other chocolate to color, but I'm not sure about painting on it.
Chocolate, yeah. Okay.
Oh, you're talking
I was
about after.
curious.
Okay.
But if you do want to try it, I would love to hear if it does work.
Yeah, no, I will try it,
Yeah.
and I'll let you know.
Yeah, I would love to hear because I used to do chocolates with my mom forever ago, and I haven't done cake pops or chocolates in so long. So if
That's my homework, to try it on chocolate.
report back for an A+.
Okay, will do. Anything else, Kathy?
I think, no, I think we're good. I could always message her.